from the American Bar Association to the YWCA, and I would like to submit that list for the record. Pages and pages of organizations.
Without objection.
For the record. Local law enforcement officials have said that this Republican House bill will impede criminal investigations, undermine prosecutions, and interfere with victim safety. I repeat the quotations. The local enforcement officials have said this bill, quote, will impede criminal investigations, undermine prosecutions, and interfere with victim safety, end of quote. Religious organizations such as the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service and the National Association of Evangelicals have also expressed strong opposition to certain provisions of this legislation. The many advocates and experts who work day in and day out on this issue, on the issue of domestic violence, have also opposed the House Republican version of Violence Against Women Act. Republicans have chosen not to listen to the professionals in the field and are failing to give the many organizations serving battered women the tools that they need. Madam Speaker, I thank you for accepting the full list of groups opposing the bill to be entered into the record. The Obama administration has said in their statement of administration policy that the legislation rolls back existing law and removes long-standing protections for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault, crimes that predominantly affect women. That is why the President's senior advisors have said they would recommend that the President veto this bill. Today, this House of Representatives has heard powerful statements from women members of Congress about the need to pass a strong Violence Against Women bill, whether it is action on, and I hope that the safety of women will be high on the list of our colleagues as they determine their vote. For nearly 20 years, the Violence Against Women Act has strengthened communities and provided critical, life-saving support to victims of violence. Because of this law, more victims get the help they need and domestic violence rates have decreased. Not only has VAWA saved lives, it has saved money. All Americans are entitled to feel safe, including in their own homes, every one of us. Yet too many women continue to live in fear. That is why we must strengthen, never weaken, the Violence Against Women Act. And I want to commend the members of the Judiciary Committee, my colleagues on the House side, the Democratic side, who have brought such a tremendous intellectual resource to this legislation, the listening to those who minister to the needs of women who have been victims of domestic violence and to those who are trying to protect it. I know that everyone in this body, Democratic and Republican alike, has the same goal, which is the safety of women. We not only want us all to have the same goal, we want us to have the same goal for all women in America. And that's why we must strengthen, never weaken, the Violence Against Women Act. Because this bill on the floor currently rolls back current law and fails to protect all victims of violence, I urge my colleagues to oppose it and yield back the balance of my time. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Gentlewoman yields back. The gentlewoman from Florida.
I yield 3 minutes to the gentlewoman from South Dakota, Ms. Noem, who is also a co-sponsor of this legislation.
Gentlewoman from South Dakota is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. For nearly 20 years, the Violence Against Women Act has supported programs that assist victims of domestic abuse, stalking, and sexual assault. I'm proud to support the legislation that's on the House floor today because it reauthorizes those programs, strengthens them by targeting more funding to programs that need it and processing that needs it, and also gives some new provisions that I helped work on with the Judiciary Committee to better serve our Native Americans. This piece of legislation, which provides services to all victims without discrimination, has always enjoyed broad bipartisan support. Unfortunately, because some in Congress saw an opportunity to use abuse victims as a prop in a political game, today we're having a different discussion, and I feel that's shameful. House Republicans are not going to allow the Violence Against Women Act to get sidelined because of politics. It's simply too important. One area of particular concern to people back home in South Dakota is provisions for Native Americans and Native American women. Native American women suffer from higher levels of abuse than non-Indian women, but all too often they don't get to see their perpetrators brought to justice. It's simply unacceptable. This Violence Against Women Act improves upon many of the programs that are designed specifically to aid Native American women, and it also includes new provisions to improve Congress's response to potential problems they may run into. Furthermore, to better ensure that Native American women have improved recourse against abusive individuals, I worked with the chairman of the Judiciary Committee and the staff to include language in this bill to empower Native American women to either petition individually the federal courts or through their tribal courts for a federal restraining order. Ensuring that these women have the ability to obtain a protection order is a vital step towards stopping the cycle of abuse that many of them suffer through. It impacts them disproportionately in Indian country than it does in other areas of this nation. Those who have suffered from violence and abuse have gone through enough. Let's not cause more harm by putting politics before victims, and let's support and reauthorize the improved Violence Against Women Act today. Thank you.
Gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from Michigan.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself 30 seconds.
Gentleman's recognized.
Ladies and gentlemen of the House, in fact, the new tribal protection orders added by the manager's amendment would reverse the Violence Against Women's Act victim-centered approach and would require Native women to sometimes travel hours to obtain protection orders from a federal district court. Madam Speaker, I am now pleased to yield to the distinguished whip of the House of Representatives, Steny Hoyer of Maryland. 4 minutes.
Gentleman from Maryland is recognized for 4 minutes.
I thank the distinguished ranking member from Michigan, who's been such an extraordinary fighter for the rights of all people in our country, and I rise in opposition to this bill. I would say, as an aside, the last speaker talked about Native Americans. The National Congress of American Indians, of course, says this measure does nothing to address the crux of the issue, a lack of local authority to handle misdemeanor-level domestic and dating violence when the perpetrator is non-Indian. It goes on to oppose this legislation. I rise in sadness, Madam Speaker. I was the co-sponsor of the original Violence Against Women Act in 1994. We passed a bipartisan bill that has helped law enforcement significantly reduce domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. While great progress has been made, unfortunately 1 in 3 American women still experiences violence by a partner, stalking, or sexual assault. That's why this bill is a perfect example of why we need to work together in a bipartisan fashion to reauthorize and strengthen the Violence Against Women Act. I will tell my friends, the Senate did this. Why is it that we have to choose disunity and confrontation over consensus? I don't know why that is, particularly on an issue of this great importance to the American people. The Senate came together, 68 of them, 2/3 of the United States Senate, Republicans and Democrats overwhelmingly supported this. And every woman in the United States Senate supported the Senate bill. Everyone. Republican women, Democratic women, who know firsthand the crisis that confronts our communities. However, this version was reported by the Judiciary Committee with no bipartisan support, and indeed bipartisan opposition. Why do we have to do that? We could have come together. We should have come together. The Senate came together. There's no reason we can't, other than trying to make our points on a partisan basis. This bill is weaker than existing law. It is regressive, and it sends the wrong message about our values. The Senate version extends new protections to Native Americans and to all who are targeted regardless of sexual orientation. Isn't that our value, to protect every individual? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all individuals are endowed by their Creator. Shouldn't we protect all individuals, not exclude some? Not only does the House version fail to include those protections, it also makes it harder for law enforcement to encourage immigrant victims to come forward to seek help and justice. I met with over 30 members of the law enforcement community on Monday, and we sat around. We're talking about generally gang violence, but we talked about VAWA. We talked about the ability of people to come forward and make complaints, feel comfortable in doing that, and enhance the ability to get domestic defenders out of the cycle of violence against domestic partners or others. They all agreed. They all agreed that we ought to make it easier, not harder. We make it harder in this bill. This is not the right way to go. This version is opposed by hundreds of groups. I've got a list here. I'm not going to read it. Leader Pelosi submitted it for the record. Hundreds of groups are opposed to this, including the American Bar Association, to this legislation, and are urging a no vote. I'm going to vote no on this, and I hope all my colleagues do as well, so that we can adopt a bill that has overwhelming bipartisan support and the support of these groups. Why do we confront these groups, say, no, you're wrong, we know better? We know better. You've worked on this for years and decades, but we're going to go our own way. And can I have one additional minute, Mr. Chairman?
Please agree to yield to the gentleman one additional minute.
I thank the gentleman. This version is opposed, as I said, by hundreds of groups representing victims, advocates, faith-based organizations, as well as law enforcement. Now, almost every one of us, almost, I imagine, has had some personal experience with this. In our own families, ourselves, as lawyers, as doctors, as neighbors, as friends, as fellow church members, we all know the costs of this violence. Let us come together and act together. This should not be a vehicle for partisan confrontation. Instead, we should adopt the Senate's bipartisan version and ensure that law enforcement agencies have the tools they need to prevent domestic violence and provide victims with the assistance they need. Let us vote no on this legislation, and then let us move forward in a bipartisan, constructive, overwhelmingly supported fashion that our colleagues in the United States Senate did in a bipartisan way. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time's expired. The gentlewoman from Florida.
Thank you, and I will yield myself such time as I consume. I would just say that I agree that all victims need to be covered, and that is what this piece of legislation does. We do not segment out. We do not pit victim against victim. It is all victims. And I reserve my time.
Gentlewoman reserves the balance of her time. The gentleman from Michigan.
I yield now 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from California, Mr. Becerra.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Madam Speaker, 2 out of every 10 women in America will be a victim of rape in her lifetime. More than that, will experience severe physical violence by an intimate partner. Madam Speaker, which one of those women is not worthy of protection or support as a result of this legislation? H.R. 4970 is opposed by tribal governments because Native American women will have less protection under this bill. H.R. 4970 is opposed by groups that support immigrants because immigrant women will find themselves victims of these crimes without the support that they need. And the community of LGBT Americans will find themselves without the support they would have that they would get under the Senate version of this legislation. Once again, the House majority demonstrates the dysfunction in Washington, D.C. Instead of applauding the overwhelming vote in the Senate with a bipartisan vote that passed just recently by 68 votes in the Senate for a Violence Against Women Act to be reauthorized, and putting that bipartisan bill on this floor Our Republican colleagues in the House went the other way. Madam Speaker, it is time for us to put the Senate bill on the floor, get this work done, follow the lead of the American public that says, get to work, make it happen, and protect women who are the victims of violence in this country.
Gentleman's
With
time
that,
has
I yield back
expired.
the balance of our time.
Gentlewoman from Florida
Reserve the balance of my time.
continues to reserve. Gentleman from Michigan. Gentleman from Michigan.
Is the gentlelady prepared to close?
Yes.
Thank you. How much time remains, Madam
Gentleman
Speaker?
from Michigan has 1 1/4 minutes remaining. The gentlewoman has 5 3/4 minutes remaining.
I would yield Mr. Lujan of New Mexico 30 seconds.
Gentleman from New Mexico is recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, it's with great disappointment that I rise today in opposition to this bill, not because the issue of violence against women is not real, but because this House bill does not do enough to address domestic violence and to protect women. Sadly, instead of taking action on a bipartisan bill that has passed the Senate that meets the needs to protect America's women, the Republican majority has chosen confrontation over compromise with a bill that is seriously limited, particularly in the protections it offers to Native American women. It was my great hope that the House Republicans would rise to do the right thing. Don't hide behind excuses. Do the right thing. Let's close the loopholes that allows abusers to get away with violence, especially against Native American women. It's not right that abusers game these loopholes to beat their victims.
Gentleman's time has
Reject
expired.
this bill and take up the Senate version.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentlewoman from Florida, does she continue to reserve? Gentlewoman continues to reserve. Gentleman from Michigan has 3/4 of a minute remaining.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members of the House. This bill has been revealed to be reauthorizing certain grant programs, but it really doesn't. It undermines the safety of the most vulnerable victims of violence. It rolls back important protections for immigrant victims, putting them in a worse position than under current law, and excludes other vulnerable populations such as tribal women, LGBTQ. In short, any alleged improvements made by this bill cannot conceal the overwhelming harm that it will cause. And when I ask who supports this bill, the floor manager could name only one person. She said, I do. And when I asked her, why do all of this women's organizations and law enforcement organizations oppose the bill, she said she made some other comment about why that was so. Ladies and gentlemen, we must turn back this unacceptable piece of legislation. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentlewoman from Florida.
I yield the balance of my time to the gentleman from South Carolina, my dear friend, Mr. Gowdy. Mr. Gowdy is a former federal prosecutor and an original co-sponsor of this bill.
Gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for up to 5 3/4 minutes.
Nell Lindsay was a nurse at a local hospital. Her shift had ended and it was time to go home. She couldn't take her own car because her husband had disabled the car so it wouldn't work. This is the same husband who had broken her jaw on a family vacation, the same husband who had knocked out her teeth in an Applebee's parking lot while her children watched, the same husband who had called their oldest son a sexual orientation epithet and put beer in the baby bottle of their youngest child. So Nell Lindsay got a ride home from the hospital from work with a friend of hers. And as they were headed home, they saw an ominous sight, Madam Chairwoman. They saw the car of her estranged husband. Now, he had been ordered to stay away from her, Madam Chairwoman, but he didn't care. And there was a condition of bond to stay away from her, but he didn't care. And there was a court order, an order of protection to stay away from her, but he didn't care. And when Nell Lindsay and her friend saw that ominous sight of Marion Lindsay in a car, they did a very smart thing, Madam Chairwoman. They headed straight for the Inman Police Department. And they're jumping over railroad tracks, and they're running stop signs, and they're running red lights. And Nell gets out her cell phone, and she calls 911. And she says, "Please help. Please help." So they pull into the back parking lot of the Inman Police Department, and she still has the cell phone to her ear. And through the audio tape that we played at trial, Madam Chairwoman, you could hear Nell Lindsay saying, "Please help. Please help." And then you heard 4 gunshots. And when they took her body out of the back seat of that car, she still had the cell phone in her hand. The system failed Nell Lindsay, Madam Chairwoman. She did everything we tell battered and abused women to do. The courts couldn't save her. The prosecutors couldn't save her. Her husband's on death row, but that doesn't save her. But even in her death, Madam Chairwoman, she did something good because she spawned changes in South Carolina in the way that we treat violence against women. And with the help of Violence Against Women grants, like the ones that are at jeopardy today, with the help of those grants, and a woman named Lynn Hawkins, who I must concede, Madam Chairwoman, does not share my political ideology in any way, shape, or form. But she put the political sloganeering and the bumper stickers behind. And she said, "Let's change the system in South Carolina," and we did it. And it wasn't in time to save Nell Lindsay, but it was in time to save a graveyard full of other women in our state. So I'm going to ask simply this, Madam Chairwoman. Can we stop the election year gimmicks? Can we stop these manufactured wars that pit one group of Americans against another group of Americans? I spent 16 years prosecuting men who raped, stabbed, strangled, shot, and killed women. I have a mother, a wife, a daughter, 3 sisters, and the images of countless women indelibly imprinted on my mind because they were killed by men who claimed to care about them. This is not about politics to me, and I will not yield. I will not yield. If you want to make women safer, then change the way we draw juries. Change the discovery rules. Improve the Rape Shield statute. But stop focusing on November's election for just one afternoon and wonder with me what good we can accomplish if we will stop the political games and if we could pick up some humanity and embrace the fact that even in a political environment as dysfunctional as this one, we can find common ground when it comes to fighting for those who have no voice, who have nobody to stand up for them. But, Madam Chairwoman, the political games have to stop, at least for a day. They have to stop. If this bill fails, it will be because those on the other side were so bent on making a point that they stopped caring about making a difference. Madam Chairwoman, the Senate bill is fundamentally and constitutionally flawed. Further to say, Madam Chairwoman, it continues to pit one group of Americans against another group of Americans solely for political reasons. Lady Justice doesn't do that, and politicians shouldn't do it either. And I urge support for this bill.
Gentleman's time has expired. All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 656, the previous question is ordered on the bill as amended. The question is on an engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act of 1994.
Madam Speaker,
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Wisconsin rise?
I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
Is the gentlewoman opposed to the bill?
Yes, ma'am. I'm opposed to the bill in its current form.
Gentlewoman qualifies. The clerk will report the motion.
Ms. Moore of Wisconsin moves to recommit the bill, H.R. 4970, to the Committee on the Judiciary with instructions to report the same to the House forthwith with the following amendment. Page 30, after line 3, insert the following. Section 6, protecting confidentiality and privacy of victims of violence. Nothing in this act shall be construed to eliminate, reduce, or otherwise limit any protection in effect on the day before the date of the enactment of this act that provides confidentiality to victims of domestic violence to protect such victims from future violence. This protection includes preventing notification of a victim's efforts to seek assistance from law enforcement from being exposed or transmitted to the victim's suspected batterer.
Madam Speaker, I have a parliamentary inquiry.
A gentlewoman will state her inquiry.
Yes, ma'am. Madam Speaker, if the final amendment that I'm offering here today were to be adopted, is it not the case that the bill will be amended and that the House will then proceed to final passage right away?
As the Chair stated on February 27, 2002 and May 10, 2012, if a motion to recommit with forthwith instructions is adopted, the amendment is reported by the Chair of the committee and is immediately before the House. Gentlewoman from Wisconsin is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. This motion to recommit simply clarifies that the preservation of confidentiality to protect the victim's identity to avoid retaliation and even loss of life shall not be weakened as compared to current law. We have debated the need to expand this bill beyond what the author has put in, and we have lost that debate because the Rules Committee has put forth a closed rule, and we do not have the opportunity to present the Senate version of the bill, which passed overwhelmingly in the Senate, 68 to 31. And so we have lost that battle for the Violence Against Women Act to include all women. But in this motion, we are simply trying to reestablish one little sliver, one little piece in this bill that we're hoping that the majority will recognize will greatly enhance the safety of all women. This motion simply protects the victim's identity to avoid retaliation and even the loss of life, and make sure it's not weakened as compared to current law. Now, we're going to be told that the manager's amendment does that, but it does not. Under current law, abused women are able to seek help and come forward to authorities under the condition of confidentiality. But H.R. 4970 as amendment does many things, a couple of things. For example, it delays the protection for battered victims by staying adjudications before pending investigations or prosecutions are completed. It creates a negative inference against the victim if law enforcement did not open a formal investigation or if prosecutors failed to prosecute the perpetrator. It creates a negative inference. I can tell you that notwithstanding the due process rights of abusers, current law provides a very delicate balance between the due process rights of abusers and the confidentiality of those accusers. The fact that the bill was amended in this way re-stimulates me to remember an incident in my own life where the balance of rights was tipped in favor of the abuser. I'm reminded of a time that I got into an automobile of a man I thought was a personal friend to go get some fried chicken. And he pulled in behind some vacant buildings, raped me, choked me almost to death. And when I went to the hospital, I was encouraged by an advocate. This was in the 1970s, long before there was the Violence Against Women Act, long before there was a Rape Shield Act. And I took him to court. And indeed, I was on trial. Because this bill, just like what I experienced, was where I had to prove as a victim that I was not being fraudulent in my accusations. Oh, they brought up how I was an unwed mother with a baby. Maybe I seduced him. They talked about how I was dressed, and they carried me through all kind of bureaucratic hoops and changes, and ultimately he was found to be not guilty, although I had done everything that I was told to do in terms of prosecuting this. I cannot stress the solemn nature of this issue. You know, it doesn't surprise me that she had the cell phone in her hand, but she lost her life because she couldn't escape this man. It doesn't surprise me that she was shot 4 times behind the police station, because the most dangerous time for a woman is when she is trying to escape her perpetrator, when she's trying to do something about it. She is trying to turn her life, hers and her children, around. And when the perpetrator is given the tools that this bill gives him to have abusers' rights prevail over the rights of the victim, she will have the cell phone in her hand, but she will lose her life anyway because she cannot escape this man. The manager's amendment does not fix this. We have heard from 325 groups and organizations who oppose this bill and say that the manager's amendment does not fix it.
Gentlewoman's time has expired.
And I thank the Speaker for her indulgence, and I urge my colleagues to support my amendment, and I yield back.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Florida rise?
I oppose the motion.
The gentlewoman from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, Democrats in Congress and others have been accusing Republicans for months for waging war on women. We've been called anti-victim, elitist, homophobic, and racist. These ridiculous attacks stop now, right here, right now. It's a shame, really. We've always had a bipartisan vote on this issue. It's always been a bipartisan issue. But this year has turned into an election year politic. Violence Against Women's Act used to be bipartisan legislation when it was enacted in 1994 and when it was reauthorized by a Republican-controlled House in 2000 and 2006. Instead of coming together to reauthorize grant programs to help victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have created a phony war on women to score political points. These attacks are unfortunate and divisive. Domestic violence knows no political or socioeconomic boundaries. Neither should legislation to fund these important programs. Critics of the bill outright dismiss the dozens of good, broadly bipartisan things this bill does in its nearly 200 pages of text and have chosen to focus their attention on the handful of things it doesn't do. So let's be real about what the bill does. It reauthorizes viable grant programs for 5 years at the same level as the Senate-passed bill. That's over $680 million a year in federal funds to support these programs. And this is on top of the increase in the funding for these programs adopted just last week by this House in the CJS appropriations bill. It sets aside specific funding for sexual assault investigations, prosecutions, and victim services, as well as reauthorizes state rape prevention education programs, programs to promote educational awareness to prevent violence and improve services for young victims. The bill also improves emergency and transitional housing services for victims. This bill provides greater protection to Indian women by designating domestic violence tribal liaisons within the U.S. Attorney's offices, and it creates a new provision, an additional provision, to allow victims of domestic violence or Indian tribes on behalf of victims to seek protection orders from U.S. district courts against Indian or non-Indian abusers. When I made the decision to pack what few belongings I had and carry along with my daughter and I to escape an abusive relationship, all I cared about was protecting my daughter and providing her a safe and healthy life. In my years of service in law enforcement, not once did a domestic assault or rape victim question where the help was coming from or which political party or organization endorsed the law that made that funding possible. All the reason for this, this bill isn't about Washington politics. It's about people's lives. If you vote against this bill today, you will vote to deny help to millions of victims. Opponents are willing to sacrifice helping millions of American women escape their abusers in the name of political gamesmanship. So I urge my colleagues to vote no on the motion to recommit and yes on the final passage, and I yield back.
Without objection, the previous question is ordered. On the motion to recommit, the question is on the motion. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The noes have it. The motion is not agreed to.
Madam Speaker, I ask for a recorded vote.
Does the gentlelady from Wisconsin
I call for
ask for the yeas and the nays?
Thank you.
Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will stand and be counted. Those, all right, a sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 8 and Clause 9 of Rule 20, this 15-minute vote on the motion to recommit will be followed by 5-minute votes on passage of H.R. 4970 if ordered and suspension of the rules with regard to H.R. 2621 if ordered. This is a 15-minute vote.
The House this afternoon has been debating a bill to reauthorize the 1994 Violence Against Women Act for 5 years until 2017. The Senate passed their version of the bill last month by a vote of 68 to 31. The House version differs from the Senate by omitting new protections for victims of domestic violence who are gay and lesbian, immigrants, and American Indians. It also imposes new rules for domestic violence grant programs. The bill's drawn opposition not only from congressional Democrats but from women's groups, and the Obama administration has issued a veto threat against the legislation. 3 votes here. This is the motion to recommit. Democrats' last chance to change the bill before final passage. Final passage vote will be next and one more vote after that. This first vote is 15 minutes. Well, in the middle of the day today, the President had congressional leadership at the White House for a meeting and lunch, the first time since late February. We caught up with a Capitol Hill reporter for a briefing on what they talked about. President Obama met today with congressional leadership at the White House. Russell Berman of the Hill joins us. How did that meeting go? Did they agree to anything?
Well, they all agreed that they liked the hoagie sandwiches that the President served them. But beyond that, it was described as a cordial but a serious meeting. And there was a bit of a clash between the President and the Speaker over the Speaker's remarks about the debt ceiling, in which he said yesterday in a speech and repeated to the President that he wants the same principle applied as last year, which is more spending cuts and reforms than the increase in borrowing authority that the Congress is expected to have to consider by the end of the year. And the President said that he wanted Congress to approve an increase in the debt ceiling without the same corresponding cuts. And so there was clear disagreement over that, and that's an issue that is definitely one that we're going to have to watch over the next several months.
The President set up this meeting. The meeting was at the White House, a lunch meeting, so clearly he had a message to deliver. What was that?
Well, the President called the meeting to talk about his to-do list for Congress, which he's been touting on the campaign trail and at official events over the last couple of weeks. That includes a jobs program for veterans, tax break for small businesses and some other measures. But the Speaker and the Speaker's office said the bulk of the meeting was actually not about the to-do list, which has not been met very favorably by House Republicans, that the bulk of the meeting was actually spent discussing these year-end issues, like the debt ceiling and the automatic spending cuts that are set to take effect in 2013, and the expiring Bush tax cuts that are set to expire at the end of the year.
You talked about Speaker Boehner. Who else was at the meeting?
It was House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, the Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, and the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell.
Are these meetings largely just for show or to try to really get something done? Is there any sense that something can get done on these issues before the end of the year or before the election?
Well, there's very little hope that these things can get done before the election, at least the ones that are the ones I just talked about, the tax cuts and the spending cuts and the debt ceiling. Now, some of those other issues that the President wanted to talk about, like the student loan bill and some of those others, are ones that might be dealt with in the next few weeks and months. But when you ask if they're for show or not, I think to some extent they are. The President wants the public to know that he is still meeting with Congress and is still engaged in the legislative process. But obviously, a lot of these negotiations are going to go on behind the scenes between staff and not, all the time between the leaders themselves.
Well, which individuals and what kind of signs will you be watching and reporting on these issues in particular as they try to get these things resolved in this election year?
Well, there's a lot of complicated, there's a big web of issues that are coming up at the end of the year, and it's a bit of a chess match because it's a battle for leverage, and we saw that even today. Harry Reid's office just a few minutes ago put out a statement saying that, Harry Reid says that he doesn't want to deal with the debt ceiling until after they deal with the expiring Bush tax cuts and after they deal with the sequestered cuts that are coming into place. And so that's a bit of a play for leverage. The Democrats think they have an advantage there. And the Republicans, Speaker Boehner's remarks yesterday were also seen as trying to get Republicans some leverage as these things percolate over the next several months. But the real action we're not expected to see until after the November elections in a lame duck session.
Russell Berman with The Hill. Follow his reporting at thehill.com. Thanks for the update.
Thank you.
On the House floor, the motion to recommit, a last chance to change the bill before final passage. Democrats this afternoon have been seeking in a couple of ways the opportunity to bring up the Senate-passed version of the Reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act. That bill passed in the Senate by a vote of 68 to 31, with 15 Republicans voting yes. The House version of the bill, CQ reports today, differs considerably from the Senate version in that it omits new protections for victims of domestic violence who are gay and lesbian immigrants and American Indians, and it also imposes new rules in domestic violence grant programs. The final passage will be next on the Violence Against Women Reauthorization. The motion to recommit in particular on this one ensures that what they're seeking to do is that nothing in the underlying bill will eliminate, reduce, or limit any protection currently available that provides confidentiality to victims of domestic violence. This is a 15-minute vote. Once the House wraps up this series of votes, we expect them to begin some initial debate later on this afternoon on the defense authorization bill. They did, by approving the rule earlier, set an hour of general debate for that 2013 authorization bill, but that's still to come on the House floor. Over in the Senate, they've been spending the day debating a number of amendments, a number of versions of the budget proposal, a number of different budget proposals, including the Ryan Plan, also a version of President Obama's budget proposal, which actually failed in the Senate by a 99-0 vote. With Democrats saying that it did not include any of the policy legislation the President had included. Those votes continue as the debates have wrapped up. The Senate continues voting on the proposals, none of which have carried the day, none of which have passed in the Senate. You can follow those votes on our companion network, C-SPAN 2. But the House here spent much of the day debating the reauthorization, the Violence Against Women Act, and started the day earlier today with Gwen Moore from Wisconsin raising a point of order against the bill. Here's part of that debate from earlier.
Mr. Speaker, and I do appreciate the woman walking us through the protocols for the unfunded mandates. And I would submit to her that the National Network to End Domestic Violence, who does a appointed time counting of domestic violence services nationwide, would indicate that it costs not only personal anguish, but there are costs in society, actual fiscal costs to not protecting women who are suffering in violent situations. Right in my own state of Wisconsin, 714,000 women have been assaulted, raped, or stalked by an intimate partner. I mean, this number actually exceeds the population of an entire city of Milwaukee. Imagine the cost to employers when people don't show up at work. Imagine the cost in emergency rooms when people show up battered and bruised and broken and have no health insurance. And approximately 500,000 of these women were fearful or concerned for their safety. 280,000 Wisconsin women, 12.7% of our population, have been stalked in their lifetimes. Imagine the cost of additional police work that this costs when nothing has been done, when these women call police and nothing has been done in terms of making arrests and asking for accountability. A study of childhood exposure to violence in Milwaukee has found that 16% of Wisconsin adults report having experienced occurring violence between adults in their childhood. Imagine the loss of productivity at schools. There's often a lot of talk about kids being inattentive in school and not being able to pass and succeed in school. Next to hunger, imagine the cost of witnessing and experiencing violence in the home as a cost to society. I was wondering if the lady would yield to a question.
I'm sorry. I will yield for a question.
Thank you so much, Representative Fox. I wanted to know, there were several amendments that were introduced in the Rules Committee last evening, and I was wondering if you were aware of any amendments that were adopted after we left the Rules Committee last evening. I know there had been a hearing, and I was wondering if any of the amendments that Democrats had introduced were adopted.
None of the amendments were made in order except the manager's amendment, which brings the bill closer to the Senate version of the bill.
Thank you so much for that response. Well, the manager's amendment thankfully was adopted because the manager's amendment did have one little piece in there that to help out immigrant women. But there are 325 groups and organizations, everything from the National Women of Organization to evangelical women and the bishops, that oppose even the manager's amendment because they say that not only are there just simply rollbacks to the Violence Against Women Act, but it actually puts immigrant women in danger as the balance is tipped from current law in the favor of these batterers, sexual assaulters, abusers, and killers. Again, Mr. Speaker, I would like now to yield to my good friend Laura Richardson from California for a unanimous consent request.
Mr. Speaker. Recognized. Yes, I ask unanimous consent to submit my remarks in opposition to the Republican bill that weakens protections against violence for women, and I stand in strong support of the bipartisan Senate bill.
Without objection.
I yield.
Gentlelady from Wisconsin is recognized.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. I was asking, ask the gentlelady if she would just yield to one more question.
Mr. Speaker, I'll yield.
Thank you.
I will I will answer the gentlewoman's question.
Thank you for your courtesy, Representative Fox. Will this body ever have an opportunity to vote on the bipartisan bill from the Senate that passed 68 to 31? Will this body ever have the opportunity? Will that bill ever be before us?
Mr. Speaker, I cannot assume what this body will do in the future. I am one member of the Rules Committee and the Education Committee. I do not have control over that, and I don't believe anybody can predict the future.
Representative, just a follow-up. You are a member, very senior member of the Rules Committee, and so I was wondering if the rule is structured in a way that will ever allow us to have it before us after we vote on this version, the Adams version of the VAWA bill. Will there be a pathway toward voting on the Senate bill as you understand the rules?
Gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I believe the gentlewoman's question is a question for the rule and is not relevant to the point of order which she has raised.
House floor debate on the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act from earlier today. This is the vote on the Democratic motion to recommit, a motion they say would ensure that nothing in the underlying bill will eliminate, reduce, or limit any protection currently available that provides confidentiality to victims of domestic violence. This is a 15-minute vote. A vote on final passage is next. That'll be a 5-minute vote. One more 5-minute vote will follow that. And sometime shortly after that, we expect the House to begin an hour of general debate on the 2013 Defense Authorization Bill. They'll do the hour of general debate today, but plenty of amendment work ahead, and that's expected tomorrow and possibly into Friday as well. Work's being done on spending bills off the floor in committees. A Senate committee today approving legislation to give benefits to same-sex partners of federal workers. The Associated Press reporting the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee in the Senate sent the full legislation to the Senate today. The Senate has failed to pass previous versions of that bill. On the House side, the Appropriations Committee approved an amended Fiscal 2013 Homeland Security bill that would prevent U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement from paying for abortions for women detainees, except in the case of rape, incest, or where the life of the mother would be endangered. And finally, on the spending side in the House, the Appropriations Committee also gave voice vote approval to an amendment draft Fiscal 2013 spending bill for defense, for military construction and Veterans Affairs, rather, that would provide about $143 billion, including $71.7 billion in discretionary spending. All of those 2013 spending bills coming up on the floor of the Defense Authorization, the Programs Bill, later today in the House.
vote. The yeas are 187, the nays are 236. The motion is not adopted. The question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The bill is passed, and without objection.
I demand the ayes and the nays.
Gentleman from Michigan.
I ask for the ayes and the nays.
Does the gentleman ask for a recorded vote?
A recorded vote, please.
A recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having risen.